gain traction on social media platforms, they need to capture attention. And so this is often accomplished by creating and disseminating compelling information, even disinformation on these platforms. So as content has grown and increasingly become more abundant and immediately available, attention becomes the limiting factor in this economy. That in combination with our weird little human cognitive and behavioral habits as human beings, it means that disinformation has become a commodified piece in the attention economy and has a lot of power in our world. So just to start, some housekeeping things. Please mute your mics unless you're speaking. Turn off your video unless you're speaking. And we're going to take questions in the chat, and we welcome those questions. We have a great lineup of speakers today. Dr. David Zilberman from University of California, Berkeley. Slavia Teta from, she's the Cornell Alliance for Science, and she's with Agribusiness Ghana. And we're really happy to have Slavia here to share her stories. Dr. Stuart Smyth from the University of Saskatchewan. So with that being said, David, do you want to get started?
Okay, no problem. Okay, so. Okay, perfect. Okay. No. Okay. Can you see me? Okay, good morning. This is David Zilberman. I'm professor in Berkeley, and I've been working on issues of agricultural and resource economics and biotechnology now for about 20 years. I've been I've been working on many aspects of these problems, but I think that acceptance and information are probably some of the most important issues, and they really relate to the fact that people don't necessarily telling the truth. So I'll start with a truism that bending the truth is not something that people take too severely.
Excuse me, David. David,
yeah.
do you have slides? Because we don't see your slides.
Oh, you don't see my slide. Oh gosh. So, oh man, so that's really a problem. Because I have I get the instruction. You cannot start to share while. Oh, you cannot start to share while other participating are sharing. So if you remove your slide, then I can introduce my slide. Kemi, if you remove your slide, okay, now it will work. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Thanks. Okay. Okay, now you can see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. Okay. So, as I said before, the Bible doesn't have a commandment, thou shalt not lie. So the reality is there is not really a moral imperative that is too big against lying. And generally, a person lies twice daily on average. Mostly it's white lies, but they are lies. Generally, unless you are under oath, you are not, or there is a law of truth, lying is not illegal. So to some extent, the people don't really have a lot of reservation, a lot of lies, and some people become basically professional liars and do very well, even become president. But so what really happened is that you have a situation that lying itself, not telling the truth, is something that people, that a lot of time is not something that will really be severely punished. Now, but what prevents people from lying? That reputation of academic and branding is basically based on telling the truth. And so a lot of time when you have an organization that want to sustain itself in the long run, and basically branding is the main asset that a lot of businesses have, they try to be as truthful as possible. But on the other hand, it's very, very easy for people to raise doubt on the integrity of established institutions that they are false. So fake news is there is not a lot of problems raising fake news, especially if the person that introduced the lie doesn't have to lose that much. On the other hand, the person that you lie about is losing a lot. So there is really this asymmetry about not telling the truth. If you have a company and they want to have a brand and they want to establish reputation, they have much more constraint than if you are an activist or if you are someone that a lot of time you have an objective to destroy an organization. Now, if you believe that your opponent is lying, bending the truth is becoming a part of your job. So I think so this really is a background that can explain a lot what's going on. Bending the truth is not something that people take that heavily. They don't, it's part of the reality in many areas. So this is one aspect. The other aspect is political economies. That generally we have two parallel systems. We have the market and the political systems. Both of them have winners and losers, and people that may lose in the market may use the political system to affect the market outcome. So there is a lot of synergy between the two systems, because the political system basically require money for moving forward. Corporation contribute to donator, to politicians, support of interest group raise money. And basically, as I will argue later on, you really have a situation that voters or regulators are audience that everyone try to convince or even buy. Now, if you look at companies, they use money to affect political outcome, but also non-government organizations use money, membership, and savvy to affect political outcome. So policy can affect the market through regulations, and the market affects policies or donation. So if you look at something like biotechnology, you can really see that there are a lot of participants that will be involved. Each of them will have a certain type of powers. And as I mentioned before, at least some of them wouldn't really hesitate to bend the truth if they don't lose very much about it. So if we really look at GMO, the discovery it's based on the discovery of the DNA, and it's a major scientific breakthrough. It applied in medicine, but its application in agriculture is regulated. We have few nations, few crops, mostly in fiber and food, in feed, but not in good, and it's not in livestock, which is really crazy. It's particularly absent in places that can benefit from it, especially Africa. Now, for Europe, I wrote many articles about it. GMO is actually can be something that may cause some problem because it will increase supply and reduce prices. So in Europe, there is a lot of pressure to move to organics. But that may be good for Europe, but for sure it's not good for the world. If you're really concerned about climate change, you don't need to reduce to increase the footprint of agriculture. But because of the relation between Europe and Africa, you can see that you have this situation that GMO is not there. And can economic explain what's going on today with the set of the regulations? So generally, if you look at the political economy arena, there are several players. First of all, there are political policy makers. They care about being re-elected and making money. And they have influence, credibility depends. But then we start looking at other groups, consumer groups. Consumer interests are very diffused. They are interested in low prices, they are interested in health. But the influence of consumer overall are very small. Now, farmers are interested in high prices and good yields. They have medium credibility. They can have some influence. Now, retailers are interested in selling product. Their influence can be quite, the credibility is quite decent. Influence is high. Biotech company, they are interested to sell their product. Their credibility is questionable because it's a new technology, even though high tech is something that has prestige, and their influence is so. And but the same is true with startups. So you really have several groups that are really competing. So to some extent, you have the big companies that their reputation is so. The credibility is quite in doubt for many consumers. The other input suppliers, the chemical companies, that again are in a similar situation, and the biotech companies. So three groups that have money, but I don't think have a lot of influence. Then you have academic institutions that they have quite a significant credibility, but and influence and some influence, and activist organization. And activists a lot of time have a lot of credibility because they are associated with the environment. So if you look at environmental group, if you look at a lot of their activities, they may harm the environment on a pragmatic base. I think that a lot of, as an economist, a lot of the activities of environmental group may not be good for climate change. But they really have a reputation that in many cases is warranted of the people that save the environment. So to some extent, you have a lot of groups that really fight for the attention of the voter and the policymakers. And the key point is that the farmers and the retailers are altogether not that much interested in the product unless it really affects their direct profit. So if you have a disease that the GMO can affect, the people that are affected by the disease will care about it. But if you are not affected by the disease, you may not care, and actually you think that it will affect your prices. If you are a retailer and you can send GM and non-GM and someone will protest in front of your store, again, you don't care that much, and you won't use your influence to protect it. So to some extent, the groups that will fight for biotech are the are the biotech companies, the startup, the academics, and they will fight against the activist organization. So now you have a real fight, and as I said before, you have an issue of asymmetry. For the academic institutions and for a lot of the companies to lie too much will be very, very costly. For some organizations that are only interested in biotech, lying may not be such a big problem. So if you look at the activist organization, actually you see that an organization like the Environmental Defense Fund wouldn't go and lie about GMO, but a lot of small groups that will be targeted to this topic, they really wouldn't care that much. But so you have this asymmetric gaze that is really that you see. So there are many ways to curtail GMO. One way is through law or regulation or through propositions that require both. And in many cases, you need to convince a group of policymakers that you are right and that opponent is wrong. And more importantly, because of the issue of loss aversion, you may need to raise some doubt about your opponent, and then your job is quite easy. So generally, if you look at what happened in biotech, you have the consumer group, you have the retailer, and then you have the parties that are disagreeing about it, and we have this asymmetry. So the opponent of biotech provide bad news, the supporter bring good news, and consumer weighs the evidence based on the trust in each organization. Now, what we have is a lot of interdependencies. Consumer attitude affects retailers' attitudes. Consumer attitude in countries that import product affect farmers' attitudes. So if the EU doesn't want GMO, the Canadian farmer doesn't want GMO. So, and also what happened, if you find a reason, like a farmer in Canada, that actually not having GMO may not be, may serve your interest because the price of wheat will be higher, you can use a consumer opposition to this reason, so to this cause. So to some extent, while the consumer overall would lose, activists will fight against you, and then the producer that may not gain necessarily from the new technology would not accept it enthusiastically. So we really have a dynamic game. There is a theory called the judgment theory that when you have contradiction among experts, most people ignore the information of both sides or decide not to get involved. So what happens if you have information that is controversial, if you have a repeated message that is negative, and if you continue to relate your say to something that's supposed to be true or to organizations that you have a credibility, you start having a situation that you generate what I can call a truism. That you can call it, you have a situation that people start to believe in something, and that's what really happened among some consumers about GMO. Either they don't want to deal with it because they can have an alternative and they can use it, or they heard something negative for a long time and it's very difficult to change their mind. Now, what happened with GMO? It started in the wrong foot politically. It was introduced in the US, and the US at the time didn't sign the Kyoto Agreement, and a lot of environmental groups in Europe that was opposing to it really look at it as a situation that the bad American tried to tell us what to do, while they themselves are not caring about the environment. At the same time, you have a lot of other food issues. You have mad cow disease, etc. America, Monsanto was an American company. It was perceived to be aggressive, and it perceived to be overbearing. So it really started in the wrong foot. And the environmentalists from the beginning targeted retailers. The moment that McDonald's decided not to use GM potatoes, they knew that they can get away with what they want to do.
David, just a couple more minutes.
Okay, so this is one issue that I can really raise, a political economy that basically arena where telling the truth is not very costly, and it can help you a lot, and it can shape consumer attitude. Then you have another thing, which I think is a worse thing, that there is a big fight in science between molecular biology and organismal biology. Plant scientists are new player in the block compared to, let's say, entomologists that will have biological control. There is a strong anti-industrial anti-industrial agriculture paradigm that view biotech as part of monoculture and other things. So there is an academic conflict that a lot of people view GMO and biotechnology as a threat. And therefore they introduce, so there is something that's called agroecology that may have some really good things, but it really sees itself as an alternative, and they believe that they never got their chance, and biotechnology is the problem. So the public see two types of technology, agroecology and organic, that basically aim to save the environment and have to deal with climate change, even though I personally think that they may contribute to climate change, they look like the good guys. And biotech that is promoted by agribusiness is look like the bad guy. So to some extent, you start with a situation where you start with a bad prior, so you really have to prove that you have something something that can really make a difference, that is really good. So to some extent, I think that the biotech part did much better than I thought that it could have done, because of the work of people like Hami and ourselves, and because of the fact that the products are actually very good products. So to some extent, you really have both a political economy in the political world and a political economy in academia. I know that FAO, both to large extent, many in FAO's agroecology perspective, and then you have global externalities. So the world is divided. Countries like India that benefit a lot from GMO is basically swept by the agroecology and the environmentalists. And my feeling is that China has its own calculation, and I believe that at the end they will really make a big difference, because if it will help them, they will introduce it. So what are the implications for the future? So we will continue with these situations. We have to continue to produce new products. I think the world already lost a lot from not having GMOs. If there are a crisis and you can provide a solution, and the solution works, it will be great. If there are food shortages, it helps the cause. Belief in science, I think, is good to GMO. And to some extent, it's the issue of persistence. The good news from my perspective is that once you have GMO product on the shelf, people will buy it. I have a recent paper about GM eggplant in Bangladesh. So altogether, if I really summarize the basic point is, lying is not something that people feel very bad about it. There is asymmetry between companies that want to keep the reputation and targeted environmental groups that don't really care, and they really are believing in their cause. Within the scientific community, there is a debate, so GMO started and biotechnology started on the wrong foot, but they have a product and they have the science behind it. So it will be a slog and it will take time, but over time, as long as people are persistent and there are opportunities, it's slowly penetrate and make a big difference. Thank you.
Thanks, David. That was great. Next up, Slavia. Can you share your slides? David, I guess you have to unshare your slides.
Okay, perfect.
And Slavia, don't forget to unmute. Hi.
Hi.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Good afternoon.
So, hi, can you share your slides, Slavia? Share
I
screen,
just
there's
did.
yeah, there's a little green button at the bottom, and it says share screen. You might have to select the screen.
Share screen.
There we go. Great.
Okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon from Ghana. Okay, so my paper presentation is centered on GMOs, the scarecrow, and the irony of farmers' votes. So my first question to our audience is, what comes into mind when you hear of Africa? Do you see Africa as one big continent who speak one language called African? Normally when you're doing application and you get to the language button and you click on it, you see language, you see English, you see all the languages available. But when you get to Africa, you just see African. And I'm like, I'm from Ghana, I don't speak African. I speak Twi, and that's one of our languages. So my question again is, what comes to mind when you hear of Africa? Africa is not a country. Africa is a continent, which is made up of 54 nations. Our population represents about 17% of the world population. And Africa is blessed with about 600 million hectares of uncultivated land. So the question is, with this land available to us, and yet we are still recording the highest number of undernourished people on the globe. According to the UN, 1 out of 4 people on the continent goes to bed hungry. What may be the reason? One of the reasons why most of our people are going to bed hungry is because of the plight of our farmers. One is climate change. Climate change has brought about drought and flood. For instance, in Ghana, we have 2 major planting seasons. That is the major rainy season, and then it is done during the major rainy season and then the minor rainy season. During our major rainy season, which starts from May to June, and then our minor rainy season will start from August to November. During the major, our farmers use that time, the early part of the year, to plan for the planting season, which starts in May. But due to changes in our weather pattern, this year, for instance, we rather experience low rainfall during the major rainy season. And then during the minor rainy season, that is where there's heavy outpour of rain and we are experiencing flood. And when there's flood, it does not just affect the citizens or the inhabitants of the land. It affects farmers as well, which affects their crop. Another issue that is affecting the productivity of our farmers is the introduction of new pests and diseases. Early this year, the eastern part of Africa was struck with locust infestation that wiped out about 300 million pounds worth of crops in a single year. Kenya, one of the countries which was affected, had to import maize from outside their country to salvage the hunger crisis. That was during COVID-19 time. So you can just imagine COVID-19 where borders have been shut and countries were not allowing importation and then exportation of goods. That was the time that the eastern part of Africa had its biggest hit with locust infestation. Due to this, there has been a fall in production or productivity by 12%. What is our major concern now as a continent? Our concern is how do we keep feeding our ever-growing population using our same old methods of farming, that is relying on traditional seeds, being highly dependent on rainfall, and 3, being highly dependent on human resources whilst there's technology. Mind you, by 2050, about 1/3 of the world's population will live in Africa. And according to the United Nations, about 850 million Africans go to bed hungry each night. And Sub-Saharan Africa is still recording the highest prevalence of undernourished people. So How do we curtail this issue? There is GMO. We have biotech that promises us of greater yields, that promises us of use of less chemicals when it comes to farming. But our people are adamant to old ways of farming. And that, my question to our audience is, why is it so that when it comes to technology, we are not too quick to change and we are still far? It's due to misinformation. Misinformation is the driving force. How anti-GMO people are thriving is because of misinformation. They are leveraging on misinformation on the continent, and misinformation is thriving because of our level of illiteracy rates. On a continent whereby we have about 65% of our people being illiterate, how do we get to know the difference between fake news and the real news out there? For instance, during COVID, can you believe in my country, Ghana, someone believed that by applying hand sanitizer, you get rid of COVID-19, which is something which affects your system, which affects your immune system. Someone believed that by application of hand sanitizer out there, we will be able to get rid of COVID-19. One thing that is also helping in misinformation or people being misinformed is religion. In Africa, many of us grow religious. We do offer prayers when we're about to eat, and there's pouring of libation, especially in Ghana. When there's any traditional festival, or when it comes to some of our people who are traditionalists, we pour libation, we do all that, and when it comes to tradition and culture, it's important to us. Because of religion, anything that is done that does not form in the normal is being seen as odd, and anything that is seen as odd is being characterized and seen as a white man's witchcraft. And that is where biotechnology falls in, because biotech does not follow the natural, most of our people see it to be something that cannot be patronized. And then we also look at colonialism. When it comes to biotech, most of the aunties are thriving on, okay, so the seed companies would want to take over. And who controls the seed also controls what you eat. And that is something that most of us are concerned about when it comes to who is controlling the seed and how do we feed our people. And because some of the things that were used in colonialism was full of deceit and lies, it has led to or yielded to mistrust among the people, and then what comes from the Western world. But my question is, are we going to continue living in fear and hunger rather than being hopeful? For me, I'll choose hope, because hope any day is better than fear. So what does biotech promise us as a continent, or as with a case study? I'm going to look at Ghana. Biotech, when you look at biotech and what it is doing and how people are benefiting. For instance, in South Africa introduced biotech, which is in the southern part of Africa, and they are benefiting from it enormously. So how will it benefit my country, Ghana, if our farmers are to grow biotech? Some of the staple foods we grow in Ghana is rice. We have rice, we eat cowpea. Locally, we call cowpea beans, and then maize. With an import, our economy is an import-driven one, and we rely heavily on what comes out of our country. For rice, for instance, last year, we had to start doing Eat Ghana Rice campaign to drive people to be eating rice, and the rice that we had available couldn't feed us if we were to rely on what we grow in our country. So that is why I see the need or the importance for us to adapt or commercialize biotech. Biotech does not just help just the farmers, but it helps the citizens too. There's an economic principle that when production increases, when output increases, the price of commodities will definitely fall. And then the vulnerable people within the community can have access to food at affordable prices. And that is what I care about. That at the end of the day, if you are to produce, grow, or if you are to accept the newest rice, which has been engineered by our Ghanaian scientists, we will be able to earn about 334 million cedis. So we can only imagine what we can do with this. It wouldn't just benefit the farmers, but at a nation entirely. We'll be able to focus on other things. We can use this money to invest in other things. By growing the newest rice, we'll be able to export. And foreign exchange is what is good for, is something that is also good for our economy. If we are to delay in the implementation of biotech, if farmers do not have access to biotech because we've made misinformation look like a scarecrow that is preventing farmers from having access to biotech, then our country will lose out on a big time. It is estimated that if we are to delay the implementation of, if we are to delay the growing of biotech on our continent, in our country, we tend to lose 230 million Ghana cedis. We know that cowpea is affected by insects, and then 70 to 80% of our yield is being lost to insects. But if we are to grow what has been designed by our scientists, then farmers, there'll be a win-win for both of us. Farmers will be laughing at the end of the table, and consumers will also be excited. So what will I recommend? I'll choose education with a continent with the highest level of about 65% of its people being uneducated. Misinformation will always thrive. But if you are to educate the people if the people are to get sensitized about what technology promises, for them to know that technology is something that has been with us and will be with us. For instance, in other aspects of, in other sectors, like the education, like the health, we are using technology. Phones have made our life easier. Instead of us traveling from one place to the other to disseminate information, which we were doing back then without technology, we've now have easy access. We are now even having this presentation or this Zoom call because someone thought of building something that can connect the world, and we have a Zoom call. So if we do not educate the people about the importance of biotech, of how biotech is not something new. Biotech has been there for a very long time. Naturally, the crops and the seeds that we grow evolve. And that is how come we have come here. With the advent of climate change and with the pests and diseases, which is affecting our farmers' productivity, there is a need for our people to be educated on the importance of biotech to us. And then we also need to involve our local scientists. Coca-Cola is everywhere in the world. When our local people take in Coca-Cola, they know it is being produced by a Ghanaian company. Although the ingredients are far, it's a franchise, we still see it to be something that we own. So there's a need for our local scientists to own the technology and put it out there, come out there and speak for themselves what this technology promises us, what we intend to gain from it. And then there needs to be transparency from both ends. The developers of the technology, they need to lay the cards on the table for everyone to know what goes in there. I have been educated about biotech, and that is why I'm passionate about biotech. I know biotech is one of the solutions that can solve our hunger issue. Why am I passionate about biotech? 28 years ago, my mom was a farmer. At the age of 17, my mom was growing crops, and at the same time, she was pursuing her education. It got to a point in time, she realized that it was so, like, it was literally impossible to combine farming at the same time going to school. So she had to give up on her educational pursuit and rather focus on her farming adventure. No one at the age of 17, no one can just let go of his or her dreams. So for me, I'm passionate about biotech because I know that back then, if my mom had biotech, she would have been able to at the same time pursue her education, because biotech promises us of that income, increase in yield on the same piece of land. She could have had access to increased yields. She could have, the pest that was affecting her farm back then would have been something of the past. And farmers today can have access to this and educate their children, because the cycle of poverty on the continent is because we have 60 to 80% of our labor force involved in the agricultural sector. And if they do not have access to technology, then that will affect their produce. And if their produce is affected, their income is affected, then the lives of their children is also affected. So for me, I'm passionate about biotech, and I think biotech is one of the solutions because it can help salvage the hunger issue on the continent. And it can also give our farmers and their children a better life. So I'll conclude with this quote from Joy Bell. The only way that we can live is if we grow. The only way that we can grow is if we change. The only way that we can change is if we learn. The only way we can learn is if we are exposed. And the only way that we can become exposed is if we throw ourselves out into the open. Do it, throw yourself. Let's give ourselves that chance. Let's give our farmers that opportunity. Thank you.
Flavia, that was terrific. Thank you very much for sharing that, and also sharing a personal story. I really appreciate that. Next up, Stuart, if you could share your slides, that'd be great.
Yes. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you to Cami for the invitation to participate in this panel. I think it's we've had a couple of interesting talks, and what I want to touch a little bit on is what are the larger social costs of disinformation when it comes to policy and to the broader impacts that affect us on a daily basis. So first off, I just want to acknowledge and thank the public and private organizations, producer organizations that are involved in contributing to funding my research. So that we hear a lot about both of these terms, sort of what is disinformation and what is misinformation. And so in a report we recently put out through CAST in the US on this topic, you can see the definitions there is that disinformation is a deliberate attempt to mislead or intentionally deceive the public. Whereas misinformation is more of a mistake that we can make. We've interpreted something wrong. We've misconstrued the communications, the data, or the evidence, and it's a genuine mistake. Whereas on disinformation, then it's a strategic business decision or policy choice or personal value decision to share information that is knowingly incorrect. And when we look at the adoption of safe technologies around the world, we can see that there's 195 countries in the world. We can see that vaccination programs for things like hepatitis B and measles are virtually globally adopted. We've got over a third of the countries on the planet have adopted GM crops, either for food use or for livestock use, and this is based on a database of over 4,300 risk assessments that have determined there's absolutely no difference in risk between a GM crop and a non-GM crop. Yet, in spite of the overwhelming amount of evidence and acceptance, we still have activist organizations that are actively disseminating information that vaccines and GM crops are dangerous to our health. They cause cancer, and autism, and a list as long as you are of potential adverse health impacts. Yet, case after case, they're simply incapable of providing any factual evidence to support any of their accusations. So we've seen innovation improve food safety, giving us longer lifespans. So if you look at what the average lifespan was at the turn of the previous century in 1900, it was in the mid to upper 40s. And as of 2020, globally, it's in the low 70s, and in the industrial countries, it's in the low 80s. So we've globally added 30 years of lifespan in 100 years, just over 100 years, due to the benefits of vaccines and increases in the abundance of food. Yet we're seeing right now that, and this is particularly enhanced with COVID, that the FAO is reporting that the number of people globally that are food insecure is expected to rise over the next 30 years. And the FAO is estimating that millions are going to be pushed back into poverty and food insecurity due to the impacts of COVID. So we can see that there's safe technologies that have been around for decades, yet it's financially beneficial for activist organizations to continue to present information that carries a huge cost, not only in terms of food production, but food availability, and ultimately in the health of us as individuals. So the basis for sound science goes back over 350 years, and it ultimately was able to evolve from alchemy. And you can see the four basic principles of what sound science or empirically rigorous research looks like. You have to have a clear testable question. You have to have the experiment based on existing theories and methods. You have to have a control group that allows you to confirm whether there was actually a measurable effect. And then the results that you're reporting actually correlate to the data that you gathered. And so once all this is done, then we take this research, we bundle it up and submit it to a peer-reviewed journal where it's reviewed by our colleagues who are experts in the field. And after grueling months of revisions and you ultimately get your paper published. And that's really where empirical science differs from these deliberate attempts to disinform the public. And this is correlated also with the rise in predatory journals. So you can see at the bottom there that, just over, a little over 15 years ago, there was only an estimated 4,000 journals, but that's quadrupled in the past 15 years. There's over 15,000 of these journals now that simply publish everything that gets submitted to them. There's no peer review. And in a lot of cases, there's no editing. There's spelling errors. And in fact, you're seeing academics reporting that plagiarism is through the roof in predatory journals. There's some evidence beginning to appear that articles that have been published in national journals that are non-English are simply being translated by people and then republished in predatory journals. And so these journals contribute to this deliberate attempt to mislead, because in many instances, journalists and certainly those of us or people in general society have no idea what the difference between an empirically based journal and a predatory journal is. And so that contributes to the idea of disinformation. And while we've had these technologies coming into our economy, certainly probably more so in the last 30 to 50 years than at any time in history, innovation creates change, and that's always rather disruptive for us. We tend to like the way things are while we're excited. to get a new iPhone or a new laptop, there's also a learning curve that goes with that, and it forces out older inefficient technologies. And really that's where these activist organizations are focusing now, is on the preservation of this romantic ideal that agriculture prior to fertilizer, chemicals, and intensive seed breeding programs was really the sweet spot of agriculture. And in reality, what it was agriculture that was rife with plant disease, insects, devastation, famine, and famines were common. So it's not really that romantic ideal. And the fact that farmers around the world were spending hundreds of hours in their field doing hand labor to weed and to seed, weed, and harvest their crops. Certainly nobody who actually farms for a living wants to return to those labor-intensive ideals that get romanticized by activists. So the disinformation campaigns really prey on the public's lack of knowledge about all of these different aspects. And then they've also begun to exhibit traits of what big tobacco did in the 1960s and 70s, where they would fund research institutes to turn around and attack medical doctors and experts that were saying smoking was hazardous to your health. And we're seeing the same thing from these advocacy groups now, and they're attacking scientists that have done research to show or to quantify that there's benefits to genetically modified crops, or benefits to gene editing technologies, or benefits to reducing the regulatory burden on new innovative biology products. And so what it creates is a public or an atmosphere of concern at an academic level that scientists just simply don't want to speak to the media. So what we're seeing in a lot of cases is there's a public searching for more information about innovative technologies, and yet at the same time we're seeing fewer and fewer academics and scientists willing to engage in science communication because they've seen colleagues being attacked in online forums. So that there is a value in trying to intentionally mislead the public, and even it's gone so far as the World Economic Forum a couple years ago identified that misinformation, this ability to intentionally or accidentally mislead the public, is one of the most significant threats. And you can see Lewandowski's been involved in this research for well over a decade, and realize that these efforts to undermine the credibility of science in medicine and in food is really running counter to the global interests of the UN and the Millennium Development Goals to try and ensure that we're reducing poverty and improving individual health. So it's gone a little bit further, and the Genetic Literacy Project has spent a lot of time and effort. So you can see here that well over $800 million was spent by dozens of activist organizations to try and refute the benefits of a safe, proven technology that increases yields, reduces chemical use, and ultimately increases farm household income. And we're seeing that biotech is going to be the fundamental building block for innovations throughout the 21st century. Gene editing and GM technologies are the basis of virtually all of the COVID-19 vaccinations that are under development. And so the question is going to become, is Europe requires everything that's GMO based to be regulated as a GMO, and their regulatory system takes about 5 years to simply approve anything for market access. So it'll be interesting to see. Europe's got itself into a real quandary, because now if there's a COVID vaccine goes through clinical trials, it realistically, if they put it through the same regulatory system as they have with plants, it'll take, it'll be 2025 or 2026 before there's any COVID vaccines eligible to enter the market in Europe, just given how risk precautious their regulatory system is. So that's going to be a big concern, I think, for Europeans. Would they be willing to wait and isolate for an additional 5 years when the rest of the world has access to COVID vaccines? And we've seen that agriculture, biotechnology, and has a real capacity to try and be one of the leading contributors to mitigating climate change. We've seen plants being worked on in labs and reaching field trials that have been modified or edited to sequester more carbon. And so some of these plants now are able to sequester 20 and 30% more carbon than conventional plants. So again, providing an absolute game changer in terms of agriculture's ability to contribute to ensuring that agriculture is able to not just contribute, but be a leader in helping to mitigate climate change. And so what this really does is it certainly starts to expose a lot of the environmental activist groups that they're really no longer interested in the environment, because gene edited crops that can reduce GHG emissions simply aligns perfectly to what their mandates were in the 1970s and 80s. And so it's become very evident that these environmental activist organizations really have no interest in the environment anymore. It's their sole focus is how much revenue can be generated through the dissemination of deliberately misleading information. And so we've seen the spillover impacts for the last 15 to 20 years that the precautionary based risk assessment system in the EU's impacted approvals in Africa and Asia. And Rob Parlberg is probably one of the most acknowledged experts in this area. And I think that the thing that really confirms this now is there's over 3,000 studies that have globally confirmed the safety and the benefits of GM crops. And in a recent analysis that Cami and some colleagues have done of 100,000 different articles, you can see that they really identified that alternative health blogs and websites were the leading cause of the dissemination of information that was just simply not correct. And so then the spillover of these memes and infomercials and types of things is that they're shared on a daily basis by people on Facebook and Twitter and other social media platforms, and the ability to control and restrict and even try to correct this information is just simply lost. So last year, the WHO classified this as an infodemic. This dissemination of information that's just simply incorrect is a huge cost to our global society and for a trust in food innovation and health innovation as well. And I think probably one of the biggest things we need to do, and this is, I think, a failing at most universities that I've seen in certainly in North America and Europe, is that scientists are simply not trained in how to communicate to individuals on a level that is designed to foster and build trust. Statistics and probabilities don't communicate trust. Trust is developed on a personal basis, so it's a one-to-one relationship, and math and numbers just simply aren't able to establish that trust. I think large-scale science projects need to do a far better job of integrating some of the social concerns into their research programs. And if we don't move in this direction of better integration for natural and social scientists, I think that the public could reach the tipping point within the next decade of saying, well, why are we funding all these large-scale science projects when they're delivering products that we don't want? And so then there becomes public pressure on granting agencies and politicians to cut back budgets to granting agencies, which means researchers, academics have less access to research funding. And then that simply means that there's fewer innovative products reaching the market. And so it's a vicious cycle downward that results in fewer innovations, fewer benefits reaching society, and that's what the public wants. And you go back and look at research or surveys on what the public look for, they're strong supporters of innovation. Yet their lack of trust in science and innovation has the potential to really restrict how many innovative products and technologies can reach the market. So that's it for me. Thank you for joining this morning. And if you are interested in following me on Twitter, there's my hashtag.
Thanks, Stuart. Great presentation.
Thanks, Kenny.
I'm going to share mine, and hopefully that works because we know how that works. Okay. Share screen. I'm going to share here. Can you confirm that you see it? Stuart, can you see it?
Yeah, it's good, Cami.
Okay, good. I think my connection broke up there. I apologize. Hi, everyone. Last presentation, and we'll move into a discussion with all of our presenters. I'm presenting on monetizing disinformation, the attention economy, media signals, and the case of GMOs. This is an overview of the study that we published earlier this year that Stuart referred to in his presentation. So what we're moving into is really essentially a new risk landscape. Statistica estimates that there will be more than 3 billion users of social media in the world as of 2021. And essentially the sensational nature of disinformation, what it does is it attracts readers. And because it attracts the masses, it can be weaponized to undermine or target products, people, or ideas. And it's ultimately used for economic gain. How this is done in practice is less understood. And in order to understand this space, this attention economy, and in order to manage it in ways that we can, from a scientific perspective, from a business perspective, personal perspective, we need to take steps to map it. Because what we have here is we have a systematic problematization of technology and good products out there, including vaccines, COVID-19, food production and agriculture also come under fire. So attention economy and the strategies that underlie it are often really invisible to most people. They don't really have a clear path there. And so trying to map it really is important. And that's what we were seeking to do with the study that we conducted earlier over the last couple of years. And we had it published earlier this year in a special issue of European Management Journal on the dark side of social media. So if you get a chance to go in and look at that particular special issue, because there's some really good articles in it that cover a lot of ground. Ours went in and we looked at the case of genetically modified organisms specifically, because it is a narrative that has been out there for a while. So actually looking at it or mapping it made a lot of sense because it has a narrative arc, and I'll explain that in a bit. So very early in our piece, we focused on the lit review, and we wanted to differentiate between misinformation and disinformation. So misinformation is referred to as inaccurate or incomplete information. So misinformation can mislead through different channels: an honest mistake, negligence, or unconscious bias. Misinformation is different. Disinformation, on the other hand, is qualitatively different because disinformation is a product of a carefully planned and technically sophisticated deceit process. So back to this notion of attention economy, which was coined in the 1970s by Herbert Simon. There's a new focus tied to the rise of the internet and social media, which have really low barriers to entry. And David talked about that earlier in his presentation. So in our data and our methodology, what we wanted to do is we wanted to look at the GMO narrative over time. So we gathered almost 100,000 unique articles from 17,000 unique domains in the internet over a 10-year period between 2009 and 2019. And we used BuzzSumo, which is a platform it's a platform and a vendor that aggregates social media engagement data for various content in the internet. And they do this across platforms like Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, Pinterest. And we used a very diverse search string when we did this. And what we were looking for in particular, we were looking for not only the numbers that were shared, numbers of unique articles, but we were also looking for how they were shared and the engagement around those articles. So we, the main metrics were total shares, but then we also overlaid things like events, particular events, like key legislative initiatives or ballots, and also anti-GMO demonstrations or events. So I'll showcase that over here. So as you can see, this is what the narrative arc looks like. You can see that GMOs have, gained some ground in the media, and people were very interested in it. But at around early 2016, the interest in the narrative kind of diminished, and that's due to probably a lot of things. An interest in pesticides, probably. Also, the U.S. election came up in early 2016, so there was a diversion of a lot of these information and disinformation-driven actors or vendors out there that share this information to go into other subject matter, because that's what incentivizes most of them. But you see that the narrative arc kind of has diminished over time. Now, most of the publishing and social media sharing of articles pertaining to GMOs occurs between 2013 and 2016, as you can see here. Preliminary review of the content suggests that there are 4 principal drivers of the GMO conversation: traditional activism, science by press conference, social media science, and legislative measures. And I'm gonna focus on just a couple of those, given the time schedule that we have. But what we see here is we've got legislative initiatives that are green points here on the slide. And then we have global protests and demonstrations. And what we noticed in terms of shares, because we're interested in engagement around these particular articles, we noticed that that with legislative initiative bills, petitions, and provisions that were out there, a lot of them were defeated. So you notice that the sharing of articles actually goes down. However, during events like global protests and demonstrations, there's a spike up in sharing of a lot of these articles. So we see behavioral differences around sharing of these articles in these spaces. So another thing that's interesting, and this is just an add-on, we're currently working on an article on that extends the data set that we were looking at. And we're looking at what happens in the marketplace. So essentially what we're seeing here is that the volume of new products with GMO-free labels have grown over the last couple of almost 2 decades. And we have this data set going from 1996 to 2020. And we've noticed that even though the GMO narrative has kind of gone off the radar on social media, the number of products that are coming into the market with a non-GMO label are sustaining themselves. And I think that probably goes back to David's comments on judgment theory. Once an idea takes hold in the social psyche, it just extends itself. You no longer need those triggers in social media to keep things going or keeping an interest in things. So summary of our findings are alternative health and pro-conspiracy sites were more active and had more impact, more shares on the topic of GMOs than any other mainstream media sites. There is continued social and political controversy around GMOs, and the growth of a new product and marketing approaches have come through as a result. So we have the non-GMO verified label that has become predominant in the market. You can go into the grocery store and it's hard to find anything without the butterfly on it. So why do we care about this? Well, this is not just about business and products. So this is not just about Bayer and our GMO seeds and so forth. This is about broader social impacts of distorted science. You know, in a network society, scientific consensus doesn't mean social consensus. So the lack of social consensus on the benefits and safety of any given technology or science or product can really undermine its adoption. So this has implications not only for businesses like Bayer, but also science communicators, and scientists themselves who are trying to get the social license to work with some of these technologies. So we have, like Stuart referred to, we have poorly executed scientific studies that are picked up by the media, distorted and amplified in that space. We have multiplier effects, retracted scholarly works that continue to be cited. So we have these poor science products from upstream, in upstream spaces being amplified on social media. This is all infecting the body of the science, and it's affecting scientific integrity. And I think something else that's really important to mention in this is that the risk profile of products and technologies are artificially raised, which means that that places like Africa and you know, in Ghana, like Slavia referenced earlier, they don't have access to these things, these technologies that could fundamentally change the livelihoods of farmers in these areas. So we know that public opinion really influences policy and decision making, and public opinion is formed in the media and in social media. So we've seen the impacts of what happens when there is poor or delayed policy making around these access to these different technologies. You get lost or shelved innovations that have societal and economic value for people. And good examples are golden rice and virus-resistant cassava. So there are things that get shelved that have social and economic benefits for people. So we're going to move on to, thank you for the time. We're going to move on to questions and discussions. I invite you to engage. I think we have about 20 people in the room, so we can, I'm going to just not share my screen anymore. Stop share. Here we go. And I'm just going to check the chat room. But I think that we have 17 participants, and if you want to just open up and share your questions, that would be, we'd be welcome to that, or you certainly can share them on the chat if you are feeling a bit shy. So please engage with our speakers. We'd love to hear from you. Anyone? David?
Okay, so I'd like to raise some interesting point that I thought about it. I've been working for many years with companies like Shell Oil and Mars and a little bit even Monsanto. And one of the key elements is that to some extent, there is a huge amount of risk aversion when it comes to the companies to invest in a new product and to go against the stream and to show that the product works.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the only way that you can win against GMO or against is to show success. what happened by default, we have one or two products, like for example, the eggplant in Bangladesh, that once it's in the market, it works. But generally speaking, working with company, every time that there is a slight chance that the market wouldn't buy it or activists will fight you, I really feel that a lot of times the companies themselves are overestimate the power of the activists and don't let the public to be the judge. To me, if, for example, Monsanto or whoever, now Bayer, will take some sort of wheat that will be no allergic creek and come to the market and say, we will lose $500 million, but we will sell for companies some sort of wheat that has no allergy in it. You'll be surprised what will happen.
Right.
So generally what I find is, and believe me, that most executives are really risk averse, and most executives take the media, take any activist organization that is a militant making it as a giant. Because I think the main advantage that biotech has is that if it tastes good and is good, you are successful. I give you an example. All of you know M&M and Mars product. All of Mars product have a sign as contain GMO. Now, I basically working with a guy named Harold Shafira, and now convince the company to do it. They sell all over the world. Nothing happened. So to me, on one hand, we can complain about it, but on the other hand, I think the companies have decided, God, this is really important to humanity. I will develop a farm in Ghana or in some place and show that you can get higher yield with BT corn or BT corn. So to me, you really need to be activist, not only by lobbying, by saying, okay, I'll have a demonstration plan. I'll have a demonstration farm. To me, that is the thing that is really missing. The big success in Africa was exporting of flour from Kenya. It happened because a Dutch Danish organization invested $1 billion to start the farm. So to me, the only way to do it is to show God, you guys are wrong.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I think that what I can only speak from perspective legacy Monsanto and now Bayer, but the way we do business is a lot different now than it was before. And do we have to evolve? Absolutely. And we're working on a number of projects that may be more driven by, rather than driven by, say, focusing on row crops, we're kind of moving in other directions and ensuring that technology gets transferred, and we're being transparent about those processes as well. So we have a couple of really good projects and on the go in Africa. And I think that these are things that more companies over time are going to do, because value to me is a broader proposition. It's not only about profit. Profit matters because profit sustains, economies, and it sustains companies, so it can keep people employed. But value, there's also social value to investment in things that maybe don't look like have an immediate return on investment. And I think transparently engaging with different NGOs and organizations and building these kinds of projects, I think, are important for companies to do. And they give good signals out there. And obviously, we're always going to be the bad guys to some degree. But I think the onus is on companies is to also direct some of their attention and their activities to building up economies and working with community. So rather than me talking too much, any other questions? Greg Graff, I noticed that your mute is off. Is that a signal that you have a question or a comment?
Yes, indeed it does. And it might have been covered. Unfortunately, I only was able to join in about halfway through, and I missed your talk, David. But the one strong impression that I'm left with after hearing the other three of you speak is putting around for the positive incentives for the disinformation. Who's benefiting from them? And the one that I didn't feel like I heard fingered out quite explicitly were what I'll call product differentiators. But that, of course, is the range of the most explicit that I have heard and seen in practice have been proponents of the organics industry that are in essence looking for anything in mainstream commodity agriculture, it seems like, in order to differentiate their product, to inform the consumer, or at least plant the seed in the consumer's mind that we are different and qualitatively better than the mainstream product. And the fact of the matter is the facts don't matter. It seems in much of those discussions that it's an emotional appeal, and moreover, it's being argued in a way that is in its non-falsifiable.
Right, and so, yeah, and David talked about that. I wish you would have heard his presentation, Greg, because he talked about that, and he talked about this whole notion of branding, and David, you could speak more to this, but that branding now is not talking about the value of your product. Your branding strategy is about throwing the other guy under the bus. That's more the branding strategy now with product differentiation. David, did you want to speak to that a little bit more?
I think there are two entities, organic farming and agroecology, that basically suggest that they are the alternative to the mainstream, even though objectively it's a problem. And I think what Stuart says is really, really important, that they really build on this nostalgia to the good old days. And also they also rely on the fact that people are totally uninformed about agriculture and a lot about science. And I think that one point that Sylvia emphasized is the issue of religion. So you have these two big brands, organic and agroecology, and I don't think that you realize how agroecology is important. Now there is a World Food Summit, and these guys are capturing the agenda. The EU now is 25% organic. You cannot, in an international organization, use the word GMO. You have to use modern technology. To me, the best thing that happened to biotechnology is that Doudna got the Nobel Prize, because that's a very good brand that is very difficult to be disputed. But I think that this is the element of product differentiation that is a real key. And if they go all the way and companies don't go all the way, there is this asymmetry. This asymmetry gives them an edge.
David, we're seeing that right now in Europe with their neonic bans. I mean, there's been numerous reports out of France this year that sugar beet yields are down by 70%. Reports out of the UK that over the last 7 or 8 years, rapeseed production is down by over 50% simply because neonics have been banned in Europe, and farmers have no chemical option to protect seeds. And so the insect damage is through the roof, and farmers are simply walking away from producing crops. So Europe is on the path to make itself even less food insecure, or less food secure than it is now. Europe as a whole imports 2 million tons more food than it exports. So Europe is restricting innovative technologies that's going to further enhance its demand for food products. They're going to outpay food insecure countries to compete for existing global resources. They'll drive up the price of commodities. And so Europe's irresponsibility towards innovation is driving up the cost of food for countries that have battled food insecurity for decades. And I think it speaks a lot to the ethics that these environmental activists have. And really, they have no interest in food security in Ghana or anywhere else on the planet. It's simply about the profitability of the message that they're trying to get out there.
See, my feeling is this, that our agenda is shifting. Like, if you take this point and make a popular article out of it, and these points are very important, but people don't know it. People are basically not aware of it. So to some extent, there is no, you don't have a lot of pro-GMO activists. It's a company, and they don't operate at the same level of intensity, and they have to be much more careful.
Well, and the ultimate hypocrisy is that Europeans are complaining about how much rainforest is being burnt in the Amazon. Meanwhile, they're importing as much GM corn and soybean from Brazil as they can possibly get their hands on, because they're not allowed to grow GM corn or soybeans and bump their own yields up. So they're importing GM crops from Brazil, increasing the demand for production in Brazil. And so the Brazilian farmers are going out and cutting down the rainforest to satisfy European demands for GM corn and soy. So, if Europe actually wanted to deal with the fact that the rainforest is being cut down and burnt, maybe they should commercialize GM corn and soy.
I'd like to hear from Slavia, because I think she has something to say.
Yeah, to add up to what Smyth said, it's sad to hear that Europe is importing GM crops from the outside world. But when it comes to Africa, there's that restriction, because they were once colonized. When it comes to what you export out there, they control what goes out there. But they are important, and it's not there. People don't know that the same people who are saying no to GMO, they are anti. They are the same people who are importing maize. They are importing others to feed their animals. And to me, this is so unfair. For me, I feel when it comes to GM, Africa, or we need to also represent and let the people know that it's not about the gains, it's not about the economic profit, it's about the vulnerable people, the people who do not get access. If you are to read what happened during the lockdown, during COVID lockdown, you will be disheartening to know that although there was COVID and the intensity of the virus was being spread and people were being told how to stay home and they were being educated, people were out there because when it comes to food, a lot of our people are in the informal sector and they couldn't have access. For them to eat, they need to be out there. And although the government even tried, for Ghana, the government even tried distributing food. It got to a time they couldn't, because they can't afford to feed them out. Like they can't afford. They have to now release the people to go and fend for themselves. So it's sad when I hear it and I read it online, but due to anti-GM people like our people do not have access to GMO. They do not have access to technology. And it's sad. So that's something I would love to add to what Smyth said.
Thanks, Flavia. Does anybody else have any questions? There's not a raise your hand thing in here, I don't think, but if you unmute, I can see if you're unmuted, and to me, that's a signal that you might want to say something. So please feel free to engage with our speaker.
Graham Brooks has his hand up.
Oh, he does? Okay, sorry, Graham.
Can you hear me? I got 2 points I'd make. One relates to the EU. As someone who is within 9 weeks of leaving, heading for more chaos. Stuart, you made the point about COVID vaccines. I guarantee you that the European Union will approve any COVID vaccine that goes through regulatory approval in record times. And the way they approve GM crops will be binned in the context of COVID vaccines, because they did it on second generation soybeans in 2009. When they need to, they ram things through the regulatory process. So they will ram through vaccine approvals. And I think it will be worthwhile in the future being able to use that example to highlight their hypocrisy. The second point I'd make is, whilst the EU is a bête noire and a butt of a lot of our critique on this subject, do not lose sight of the fact that unfortunately it is now as endemic in North America. You only have to look at the court cases over glyphosate to highlight that it is just as big a problem now in the United States.
Cool.
David, any comments?
Well, no, I feel that what really happened with glyphosate is really crazy. But I think the key element is that we have a regulation that pesticides, that we really don't use benefit cost analysis on any product. So if you look at glyphosate, for sure there is some damage. There is nothing in the world that doesn't have damage. But if you look at the benefit and cost of glyphosate, it is probably higher than anything else. So to some extent, the legal system is such that it really discourages any change, and you really don't look at, gosh, how this type of solution can affect something like climate change, but how it can really operate within a legal code that basically is absolutist. And I think that is a big problem.
Yeah, and this is just a personal anecdote, but so we moved to the US from Canada 5 years ago, and I did not understand the American litigation system. I've come to understand it because of the glyphosate story, but it is fascinating to me because two things. One, it operates completely differently. The litigation system in the US is completely different than any other jurisdiction in the world. But the problem is most people don't realize that it operates differently than every other jurisdiction. And I think, for like personally experienced, my Canadian counterparts, family members, friends, colleagues, viewed the glyphosate story going on in the US as something that could happen in Canada. And the litigation system in Canada is completely different. So there is these underlying issues, so glyphosate was a thing, and it was something that was brought forward and brought into the litigation system. It certainly wasn't the first thing, and it won't be the last thing. So because the litigation system in the US is an industry unto itself. So there's billions and billions of dollars made every year through the litigation system, and it doesn't go to the plaintiffs. Like that, the small percentage of that money goes to the plaintiffs actually. So I think what we're seeing is what you have is you have this overarching space. When we look at the landscape of disinformation, the pieces that come together also include the litigation system, because again, there's a way to monetize all of this. So as soon as you can problematize something, you can find a way to monetize the information around it, and litigation may be, again, another step in that. So that's just my personal observations from all of this.
Graham, I agree with your point about the EU regulating COVID vaccines. Yeah, there's no way that they'll ever take 5 years to approve a vaccine. You're right, they'll change the system for gene-edited vaccines, and really what they'll confirm is that from a science perspective, they're treating a gene-edited virus or even a bacteria as being safe and acceptable, yet a gene-edited plant or animal is a danger and simply too risk adverse and can't be allowed. And so I think Europe's in danger of treating science like ice cream flavors. They say, oh, well, we like this flavor of science because it's produced a vaccine. So yeah, it's safe. We'll reduce the regulatory requirements for that. But oh no, we don't like those flavors over there, and we'll put so many barriers in place that nobody's ever able to commercialize any of the technologies. And so what the message it sends to the public is that it further erodes the average European's trust in science when they see the regulators and governments saying, oh, well, if we use science in this way, it's safe, but if we use it in this way, it's dangerous. And so if you're a European consumer with a lack of awareness of anything in the food production side of things, and you saw the government putting barriers in place, I mean, it would further erode your trust in any of the new innovative products. So I think, the decisions by the European governments on to ultimately create a split regulatory system for GM or gene edited drugs, vaccines, plants and animals is really going to be a further blow to Europe's innovative capacity, because young Europeans are going to say, why would I spend the next decade of my life doing a master's and PhD to become a scientist when I have no access to the most innovative technologies? It'd be like asking someone coming out of high school to say, oh, you know what? If you want to be a hairdresser, we'll go to this hairdresser school in Europe where you can learn the hairstyles of the 1960s. Who's going to hire you? You'll never get a job. And so these young scientists, young adults are going to move to countries around the world, the Americas, Australia, parts of Asia, and other countries where gene editing is treated as an equivalent technology. And not only are fiscal resources flowing out of Europe like a river, they're going to watch their best and brightest young minds leave as well.
Yeah. I think, generally speaking, inconsistent regulation is something that is always have been there, and the people do benefit cost analysis. I think what happened is that, as I said before, I think there is asymmetry. The companies don't bring a lot of products that are really beneficial. People don't see the link. Europeans care about climate change, but they don't see the link between climate change and the using of this technology. So to some extent, I think a lot of people in Europe really try to be virtuous, and to some extent, the virtuosity and being a moral person is associated with all this notion of natural product and organic, and to some extent it is driven by a lot of by the self-interest of European companies. But I agree with Stuart. It really will destroy their ability to compete scientifically in many areas, and most importantly, I think that to me the biggest dangers to deal with climate change. If you really want to look to move away from fossil fuel, we have to use the bioeconomy, and the fact that no one takes it seriously, and the only solution that we have is solar, which is great but need more support, I think is a problem. But people don't think systematically and really don't see the context and the alternative. They think it case by case. So one person died from Roundup, so Roundup is bad. So I really think that would be the biggest challenge, and I'm afraid that society will really learn in the hard way. And I think if there is one thing about this pandemic is that if you don't prevent it, and you don't take measure, and you don't develop technologies to deal with it, then suddenly you have to adapt, and then it's very costly. And I think that we will adapt. Climate change will be a problem that will be much worse because of the lack of GMO. And as I said before, I really think what other people think is, how do they see the role of China in all these things? And if people know about what is the role of misinformation in China about biotechnology, because I really think that China will make the difference.
I agree, David. I think Europe is really hamstringing itself because we've seen the research of with the ability to increase the CO2 sequestration of plants. Just imagine putting that into trees and having forests that could sequester 30 to 50% more carbon than they currently are, or trees that are in our backyards or flowers and shrubs that'll be planted in our yards. And so you could put something in your own yard that would have an environmental benefit to helping mitigate climate change. And Europe is just turning its back on being a responsible leader to looking at innovative ways to reduce climate change. So I think what's coming out in Cammie's research certainly confirms a lot of this, and the research that the Genetic Literacy Project has done is that Cammie alluded to this, that class action lawsuits are simply a way for the legal community to make money. They're not interested in the harms that have been done or the people that have been impacted. They're looking at taking 50 to 60% of the settlement for their own wealth. And the environmental movement have watched what the legal community has done in terms of generating class action lawsuits, and they're doing the same thing with information. They're sending out these deliberate campaigns of lies and deceits, and then they sit back and watch the money come in through donations, and they're just laughing at the public that they've been able to get away with duplicating what the legal community's been doing for 25 or 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So just to speak to that a little bit, so here's the paradox of all of that I find interesting. We know, because we're encouraged either as scientists or, like as Slavia pointed out, we have to tell our stories. In order for us in North America to understand what's going on in Ghana and Africa, we have to hear these stories. That's what I need to hear. But the thing is, we have this attention economy, but now we are driving a narrative economy. And the narratives are coming from all different disparate spaces. And some of them come with good intent, driven by good ethics, and but then there are others that are really intended to misinform. So it's not only an attention economy, a disinformation is commodified, but you also have this narrative economy, which I think, from a scholarly aspect, I think that there's some opportunity there to explore that economy as well in all of this, because the legal system litigation system also drives its success through the narrative, even with, jury selection, plaintiff selection, like all of it, they're sharing a story and emotion rather than anything that's evidence-based in those spaces. And it's also happening out there in social media and social spaces as well. I'm feeling like we need to maybe ask our participants if they have any questions or comments that they'd like to share. We could move to closing down this session. If you want to post something in the chat, I'd be happy to share that as well if you'd prefer. Any thoughts? We're starting to lose some people I see too. So, Flavia, do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience? Because I'd like to hear from you again too.
Okay, so this is my last comment. I think for once, we didn't care about the process that brings food in terms of the technology that engineers the food during COVID or in the times of COVID. We cared about how to get food or how the food got on our table. And that's something important we should look at. You see, COVID has made us see what is really important and what is not. It has made us to see that there are really underlying factors that we need to really look at when it comes to human survival. It's about food, because now, without good food, your immune system will shut down. And for us here, food is what we can afford. With healthcare, is really expensive. So if you have something that can boost your immune system, then you'll be able to fight something terrible as COVID. So we should now, for the aunties, when COVID came, it didn't spare anyone. It attacked whether the rich or poor, whether you are anti, whether you are for. So we should refocus our energy on what is important for human survival, which is food, clothing, and shelter. And when it comes to food, we should give way for technology to suffice. If something will work, we should just throw ourselves out there and let's allow it. Let's give our farmers that choice. If all of them have choice, we shouldn't take that freedom away from our farmers. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent words. On that note, just the whole COVID thing, I think something that we've all struggled with is disinformation and misinformation in agriculture. This is nothing new to agriculture. This is what we've been struggling with. But I think to your point, Slavia, COVID became the great equalizer in our world. It affected everybody. And with it came its own brand of disinformation. And I think what that's done is it's raised the profile or raised public awareness around disinformation more broadly. So I think this is this is an opportunity for us in agriculture to really start talking about why disinformation impacts things like food security, food production, and so forth. So COVID has devastated communities all over the world, of course, but in a way it's raised the profile and raised awareness around disinformation. And this is something for us in agriculture, maybe we could take advantage of and start sharing our stories around this. Stuart, do you have any last thoughts?
The one observation I have to make is that, the public surveys on public trust show they place a very high level of trust in farmers, sort of 75 to 80% of the public trust farmers. And so I'd like to see more research that helps the industry understand why that high level of trust in farmers to provide safe products doesn't actually correlate to the trust they have when they're asked about the food product. So if I trust a mechanic to do a good job and I take him my car, then I should drive my car away with high confidence that it's been repaired properly. Yet consumers are saying, well, we trust farmers to grow things properly and to do a good job. Yet when they go to the grocery stores, that trust isn't carrying over to the product. So I think there needs to be more research that better understands the minds of consumers, so that as scientists, we're able to do the research and provide the information that helps bridge that reassurance when they're in a grocery store. So I think, we still have a lot of work to do to help understand what bundle of information the public's looking for to have that increased level of confidence.
Thanks, Stuart. David, any last words before we close the session down? Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. Special thanks to the speakers that joined me here in this ICABR webinar. It was a very stimulating discussion. Appreciate your expertise, your time, and from our audience, thank you for joining us and thank you for your comments and your questions. We look forward to engaging again soon. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Cami. It was a great session. Thanks, David. Thanks, Flavia. It was nice to meet you.
Yeah.